It is high noon. I'll call the meeting of the Housing Policy Board to order. And let's see, the agenda says first we'll do introductions as novel approach. So my name is Norton Campbell, I'm your chair.
Hi, my name is John Van Landingham. I work as a lawyer for the Oregon Law Center, and I'm a board member.
My name is Stephanie Jennings, and I'm staff at the City of Eugene.
Chris Pryor, Eugene City Council.
Kristen Carley with St. Vincent de Paul.
Teresa Kennedy, City of Eugene staff.
Marina Brassfield, Minutes Recorder.
Karen Sachs, Deb Northwest, formerly Nedco, and for Emily Ryman.
Jennifer Lee, architect, housing policy board member.
Isaac Judd, realtor and policy board member.
And out there, if you all like to introduce yourselves, Bill, start with you.
Bill Van Vliet with NOAA, the Network for Oregon Affordable Housing.
We will hear more from him.
Michelle Stark, St. Vincent de Paul.
Erin Day, Deb Northwest.
Diana Dumowski, affordable housing advocate.
Jackie Lowe, St. Vincent de Paul, Members of the Committee.
Brendan Fulner, I'm a social work, master's of social work student at Pacific University.
Devin Jenkins, Laurel Hill Center Housing Programs.
Josh Caracas, Franklin Eugene Tenant Association.
Charles Dunaway with the Bobble Village Complex.
Chris O'Neill.
Nicole Feller with the City of Eugene.
Ellen May Galloway, City of Eugene staff.
Tom Doyle, First Decile Housing.
Okay, public comment. Anybody from the public want to speak to us? All right, we're already ahead of the agenda. Minutes approval. I only saw one thing. I think Ruth Daimler is, I think you got her last name wrong.
Demler.
You think it's
Was it a
spelled wrong in the list of
D-A-I-M-L-E-R?
attendees?
Where?
She's
The
one
list
of
of
the other
attendees.
people attending the meeting.
Under Todd's name.
DEEM, two of them.
Isn't her name D-A-I-M-L-E-R?
No, I think
No, that
this is right.
spelling looks correct.
Okay.
You're thinking of the automobile.
Well, no, I was thinking of Ruth, but anyway, I'm wrong. I'll admit it. I didn't see anything else, John.
Yes, I have a lot, so you're gonna lose your timing. But go ahead, Tom.
I wasn't here.
Oh, so take her off.
Take her out.
So here's mine. I'm gonna start on page 2. The next to last paragraph, it starts with Josh's name. And the second sentence says, first, the Renters Protections Committee felt a little slighted for not being represented because 51% of the city is tenants. I don't think the Renters Protection Committee would feel slighted. I think CETA might feel slighted because the HPB is not, so tenants are not being represented on the
CETA,
HPB,
right.
or not being represented on the renter protection. Let's have it say that. First, the CETA felt a little slighted because the Renter Protection Committee is not have enough tenant representatives, something like that.
Right.
Okay, if I go too fast, yell. Second, page 3. Under items from HPB members and staff, add a sentence to that first paragraph saying, both presentations were about Senate Bill 608 regarding no-cause evictions and a rent cap. Because we don't, as it is now, it doesn't identify what these two wonderful presentations were about. And then in the next paragraph, next to the last line, where Chris says the city had decided only to post videos paid for by the city, I think that should read for or by the city. Then on the next page, the third paragraph that starts Mr. Ivy, the last line should read evening's Eugene City Council meeting, which is important because the first sentence was about the Springfield City Council, as well as the approval of a multi-unit property tax exemption application, not funds. There are no MUPT funds. There are exemptions and applications. So delete funds and use application. Further down the page, where after that thing about vote, Commissioner Burney reported that he joined previous Lane County Commissioners Sita and others in testimony to the Springfield City Council organized by Lori Harbor. So delete a session and replace it with testimony to the Springfield City Council. Page 5. Middle of the page, under manufactured homes, the first full paragraph that starts, Mr. McDonald explained, line 4, parks with mobile homes dated pre-76 were targeted, paren 1976 was the year, and then take out used by HUD, say 1976 was the year when HUD adopted building standards for manufactured homes. Mobile, you could say mobile homes. Next paragraph, next to last line, where it says there were some grants and subsidies available from NOAA. I think that's N-O-A-H.
Oh, yeah, right, sure.
And then the last paragraph on that page, the next to last line says possibility of a new park zone in Springfield. Delete the word zone. Next page, page 6, the fourth paragraph that starts with my name, the next to last line says creating funding for home replacement. We're not replacing parks, we're replacing homes and park preservation programs. Intertrust for Oregon, N-O-A-H. Not the, not NOAA, the, whatever it is, the city thing.
Predicts the weather in Alabama, yeah.
And that's it.
Okay, anybody else with the minutes? And I'll deem them corrected, I'll approve as corrected. Okay, next, items from Housing Policy Board members and staff. John?
I had two things. One, I wanted Bill Van Vliet to describe the conference in Portland in November regarding manufactured homes.
Right now. So in November, there's going to be a national conference related to manufactured housing. It's called.
Did you say national?
National.
Yeah.
It's called I'm Home, and that stands for Innovations in Manufactured Housing. It's a program run by Prosperity Now, which used to be known as CFED, for those of you into housing policy. They do this every year. Last year it was in Nashville, and this year they are coming to Portland, which is very exciting. They bring in panels of and organized presentations from a wide range of organizations and people working in policy from around the country. Talk about best practices, how we do more to protect manufactured housing and manufactured home parks to keep them affordable for low-income households. So it's a great conference, it really is. There's a lot of manufactured home residents end up there and advocates from really around the country, so it's really great. Had I been thinking, I brought a flyer, but I didn't bring a flyer, so my apologies.
So could you send the electronic flyer to Teresa, and then Teresa could share it with the mailing list?
Or you can send it to me, Bill,
Okay.
either is fine, yeah.
Okay.
And then secondly, I wanted to embarrass Jenna by noticing she was a newspaper media star. In case you didn't get to see her smiling face focusing on Springfield women.
You go, girl, right.
That's it.
Okay, Chris?
Just to follow up on what was in the minutes, as you know, last meeting, we had heard that there was going to be a motion to not only oppose, try to repeal the passage of House Bill 2001, but also to not do any work on developing local plans and policies to comply with it. That did come up. It was a motion made, and thanks, in addition to the help from the Housing Policy Board, the council did vote to go ahead and try to work on a repeal in the 2020 session, but did not vote to not take action on preparing for the eventual passage of 2001. And I thought that was really good, because I don't foresee repeal. I don't want the state to impose their plan on us if we can have a chance at developing our own. So I thought that worked very well, and instead of the 7-1 vote that it was before, it's now a 5-3 vote. So I think we're incrementally moving toward being more supportive of affordable housing.
And if I could piggyback on that, you might not be surprised that I happened to have a long scheduled meeting with the Speaker of the House the next morning in Portland. And one of the first things she said was, "So what did the Eugene City Council do last night?" So people are paying attention.
Good.
Okay. Question?
Just working on the River Road affordable housing. We'll submit permits in December and break ground in April or May.
Let's see, we have, the last 2 months, we've been talking about our name change, so that happened. We now are officially Dev Northwest, so thank you for everyone who was able to attend our event last month. On the development side, Erin is here. I know that she's been introduced to this group before. We are working diligently on closing and then breaking ground on our community land trust project, one in Cottage Grove and one in Florence.
So if I could piggyback on that, Emily Ryman was speaking to the whole group. It was a large group, a lot of people in the room. And she started by noting that NEDCO was incorporated in July of 1979, and that I was the lawyer who did the incorporation. And then she noted that she was not born in 1979.
Thank you.
I remember when that happened too.
I don't have anything to add.
Yeah, nothing to add.
So I'd like to ask for, maybe Chris, I don't know, an update on, just from the minutes, ADUs. Have we moved any further on that?
Oh, golly, yeah, that's,
Other than two
I guess if
thousand.
you could use the word incrementally. As you know, staff has been working very hard to try to develop revised codes.
Right.
And they had originally come with a list of codes that they thought needed changing, and we had kind of voted into a red, kind of yellow, and green. Green being, we don't have a dispute with those, let's go ahead and put them through. Yellow, let's talk about them. And red, no, we don't really think these are appropriate either by state law or by local need. And we have continued to have conversation about that. It's one of those ones where you have to vote on it, because you can't just nod your head. And we have once again visited those. We're still pretty much in the same place in terms of moving that list forward. The sticking point right now is, and I'm oversimplifying, and Stephanie can jump in with the details, which would be great. We're still having the sticking point of those things which the state, either through 1051 or 2001, have said these really are no longer appropriate to use. Right. Things like parking or owner occupancy. And so the law has basically said you shouldn't include those, but we still have a number of counselors who still believe those are fundamental to neighborhood livability. So that's still where the conversation's going in circles, but I think we are gradually making incremental progress.
And you all talked about Airbnbs, didn't you?
We had a
Maybe
presentation
Stephanie
on.
should talk about it, I don't know, but.
Yeah, we did. And short-term rentals.
Yeah.
And basically, the issue had come to us and folks in neighborhoods saying that short-term rentals, whether it's Airbnbs or bed and breakfasts or whatever you want to call them, are destroying livability of the neighborhoods. Noise, drunks, renters are bad people who destroy neighborhoods. And so we were really having an initial conversation about what could we do to make sure that if you're going to have a short-term rental, it's at least compliant with the livability of the neighborhood. So we looked at what other cities have done. A number of cities have created regulations around short-term rentals. And as opposed to an outright ban, the council felt it was better not to approach an outright ban, but really to try to create a set of regulations to determine how many days out of the year you could rent, how close they could be to each other, whether or not they had to have an inspection standard, which we decided not to do because regular rentals don't have an inspection. Why should short-term suddenly have an inspection? And so we really approached it from what are those regulations you put in place because you want to make short-term rentals better or more appropriate or more legal versus those regulations want to put in place as a backdoor way of keeping them out of the neighborhood. And so we agreed to have staff investigate a number of different types of regulations other cities have used and then bring them back to us for review, but specifically without the one around inspections and not proposing an outright ban. So we're still in the process of saying we're not opposed to short-term rentals, but we want to make sure that they're compatible with the neighborhoods and they're not having an undue impact on rental stock in the area.
So that's the latter point that I'm personally interested in. You know, are we taking rentals out of them, off the market?
And it was kind of inconclusive in terms of whether or not that's really true. I mean, anecdotally, people seem to feel that short-term rentals are somehow hurting the rental market, but they've not been able to substantiate that with any actual data. So
the staff did a survey of national data, and it appears to be low.
Yeah.
Having a low impact on the rental market.
Here or in
Nationally,
general?
Nationally. So we're looking at it a little more closely here, but so far we haven't seen any red flags that it is creating a significant problem. But the notion of regulating it for neighborhood compatibility is still, I think, a reasonable thing to do.
Okay, thanks. So, staff?
Yes, so I did want to just mention that we do have our consolidated annual performance and evaluation report. And this is something that Teresa is now working on in pulling together all of the information about projects and programs that we've accomplished over the past year. So that's now available in their copies. I think all of the copies probably have been taken.
Couple, and they're in packets. But
And
there
they're
are
in
a
the
few.
packets too.
Mhm.
And it's also on the website if anybody wants to take a look at that. Ellen, do you have anything?
You mentioned last month the housing RFP is out for Springfield only projects, and that is due October 30th. So we look forward to anyone who wants to submit a proposal for a project in Springfield. Thanks.
Nicole, do you want to add anything? No? One other thing that I do want to mention, November is definitely conference month. And so United Way is holding a conference on collective impact, and I believe it's actually the same dates as the conference, but we'll try to get people to book those.
What do you mean by collective impact?
So collective impact is a strategy essentially for multiple organizations to work together on a shared set of outcomes around a specific topic area. And so United Way has shifted a portion of its funding to supporting collective impact initiatives and has funded 3 major initiatives for their first round, as well as a number of community support grants. And so the 3 initiatives that are getting funded are 15th Night, and which is an effort to address youth homelessness in our community, includes a large number of partners, some of the folks in this room. And then the second initiative is a collaboration among Huerto de la Familia, Downtown Languages, and Centro Latino, where they are exploring a merger and creating a hub for services. And then the third initiative is called the Healthy Homes Initiative, which is being led by Cornerstone and Homes for Good, which is really focused on how to integrate peer support specialists into affordable housing. And so, but the idea of collective impact can be used to in a wide variety of settings. I mean, any group that is working on a particular issue and is trying to figure out how to organize themselves and to track their outcomes. And so this is really an effort to not only support the funded work, but to help anyone in the community that is thinking about using a collective impact approach for their work. So it is a conference. It's open to anybody who wishes to register. There's information on the United Way website, and so I would encourage folks to consider attending. They did it last year for the first time, and it was very successful. They brought in external speakers who are doing this work across the country. There's now a national collective impact conference that attracts hundreds of people that are working, who are using this model.
Interesting.
It's a collaborative model.
Yeah. So next on our agenda is Bill Van Vliet, but before,
Add something.
okay.
Can you say anything about I just got an invitation from Mayor Venice about a presentation on the 24th by a Minneapolis city councilor on housing infill. You know anything about that?
I only know a little bit. So Oregon APA, American Planning Association, is holding their annual conference here in Eugene. And as part of that, there is a keynote speaker who is a city councilor from Minneapolis who is coming. And I think as part of that, Mayor Venice is organizing a meeting to learn from Minneapolis about housing issues.
I thought that it was, so Minneapolis also just adopted some tenant protections. But apparently this person is speaking only about the infill stuff. I don't know.
I can
People
look
might
into
ask.
it. I don't know the details.
The announcement was a little weird because it talked about a luncheon at 3 p.m. So it made me worried that it was stuck on Minneapolis time, not Eugene time. But I don't know whether it's restricted attendance or if they're feeding people or anything. I can't go. But
Okay.
Yeah, it'd be great if you-
I can look into it.
So you think they've adopted some tenant
they
protection?
just did, yes.
They just did?
Similar to Portland stuff, security deposit
Yeah,
limitations,
okay.
screening limitations.
Okay.
Okay. Yeah.
Is Minneapolis also, I'm sorry, is Minneapolis also the one that initiated something very similar to 2001? Yeah, okay, perfect. So it could be, that's what I thought.
They've prohibited single-family zoning, right?
Right, yeah. So that would be interesting.
And I think that's what he's supposed to tell me, this
Right.
counselor's
I
supposed to
mean,
be
that
talking
infill,
about.
that makes sense.
Yeah. But I think it's because he is going to be here for the conference
Oh.
that this was an opportunity to
Okay.
have a conversation.
Okay, that makes sense.
Yep.
So before we hear from Bill Van Vliet, I was going to put our two elected representatives on the spot. Joe must have heard about that since he decided not to come. And I thought maybe, Chris, anyway, you could sort of give us an overview of where Eugene is mostly putting its energy in dealing with the housing crisis and what the biggest challenges are.
Oh golly, how much time do we have?
Oh, 3 minutes, the usual.
I'll try to summarize. A few years back, we held I won't call it a goal setting session. I'll call it a focus area setting session, where we decided that the 3 top areas of focus were going to be public safety, homelessness, and housing. And we have, I think, got a handle on the public safety side with the new payroll tax. The homeless question is one that's being dealt with right now with the results of the TAC report and how we can really embrace those and integrate them as a way to address homelessness. That actually has a certain overlap into the third area, which is housing, because aspects of the TAC report very specifically dealt with housing, how to keep people in housing, how to manage housing, how to protect housing. So there's a spillover there. But in the area strictly about housing, that's the stuff we're dealing with right now, around the ADUs, which are symbolic to the larger conversation about the degree to which Eugene is embracing alternative types of housing to just the single-family home on the 6,100 square foot lot. The passage of 1051 and 2001 have definitely added a dimension to the conversation, but I think the sticking point for us is beyond the neighborhood question, because that's a whole separate discussion. But one of the on-the-ground issues for us is we know we need more affordable housing. We want more affordable housing, and we're struggling to figure out the resources that we can apply to affordable housing. In some areas, Portland, for example, they have passed bond measures to help build affordable housing. It's an option that we might want to consider. Would people vote for a bond measure to pay for more affordable housing? Part of the Affordable Housing Trust Fund's intention is to help leverage to be able to do something like that. But I'll be perfectly frank, where we're struggling right now is figuring out what are the models we can use to incentivize the construction of housing that is much more affordable. We have many people who will come and say, we need more affordable housing. You need housing that people in the lower decile can afford. We need housing that people who are just working families can afford. I agree, couldn't agree more. The struggle is if you go to a builder and say, would you build more affordable housing? They will say, yeah, show me how to make this pencil out. And I think that is our struggle right now, is finding the ways to make it financially feasible to build the kind of housing that we want, and figuring out what tools we have in our toolbox to do that.
So I'll let you off the hook for now and let you put aside the neighborhood issue. But,
Yeah.
you know, it's.
Yeah, because that would be a much longer conversation, and
I
you've got a
understand.
presentation.
Okay. Bill?
Yeah, do you want me to just speak from here?
If you'd like.
That's fine, sure.
You're welcome to come up here if you'd like.
Whatever you prefer.
Whatever you prefer.
No, really. So I'm Bill Van Vliet. I'm the executive director with NOAA, the Network for Oregon Affordable Housing. And we are a statewide nonprofit that provides financing for multifamily affordable housing projects. We've been around since 1990, so we've been here a while doing this. Originally formed by the Oregon Bankers Association, convened a group of banks to form this pool. And right now we have about 23 banks that participate in our loan funds of different kinds. We are a CDFI, which is a Community Development Financial Institution, and as such have access to some of that capital. I think that's about the only thing it really gets you, but it does help a lot, so that's useful. So we, as I said, operate statewide. We have a really good distribution of activity in both the urban areas and the more rural areas, and that's really important to us and really is important to the banks that founded us and the organizations that we work with, especially the ones in the more rural communities who often don't have access to the same kinds of financing and capital resources as the big urban communities have. We are really fortunate to have two people from this area, both John Van Landingham and Stephanie Jennings, who assist in our programs. John's been on the board practically since the beginning, and Stephanie's been on our loan committee. She represents the public interest on our loan committee and has for many years, and they make great contributions to us, so I want to thank you both for that. It's really invaluable to our ability to do our work. We have about $250 million of capital available to us through our various resources. The bulk of that does come from banks, but we're getting an increasing amount that comes from other resources such as foundations, public sources, and then NOAA is slowly building its own resources as well.
Mention the none money.
We do have none money, which is a euphemism for investments from religious orders, which have a very keen interest in affordable housing. We have, I think, about $1 million total from several of those different organizations that have been very, very helpful and supportive of our work. So that's exciting. A little bit unique, I believe. They're some of the hardest ones to borrow from, by the way. They're very careful with their investments. With that, we have made about 290 loans since inception, about $360 million of loans made, and over 10,000, about 11,000 units that we've financed since the beginning, just to give you a sense of scale. So our primary product, primary business line is permanent financing. A lot of the banks don't want permanent loans, so we step in and do that, and that's why they formed this as a consortium, although more and more the banks now want those permanent loans, so we're fighting tooth and nail with our own creators to do that business, but that's fine. It's good for housing providers because it makes more competition. A few years ago, we launched an acquisition fund to help our partners have access to quick capital to acquire projects when they come on the open market. That's been very helpful for them. Essentially, it's one-stop shopping. We blend equity and debt together in one place, and then they have 3 or 4 years to figure out then that longer-term strategy. We have just pure pre-development loans, and then we've just recently launched a tax-exempt bond fund. So we will now purchase tax-exempt bonds for those doing 4% bond projects. That's been popular out of the gate, and so actually for several of our programs, we're going to be going out talking to our bank friends about increasing their commitments to us, which is always a very thrilling experience to do. We have some great partnerships here in Lane County and the city of Eugene. You have great developers here, and we really enjoy working with all of them. So I'm really pleased to be here today for that reason alone. We've funded 45 of our loans in Lane County, about 31 million total. Producing about 1,600 units. If you break that down to just Eugene, Eugene represents about half of those, just for a sense of scale. So, very active area, part of the state, which is really, it's terrific. So we have, as an organization, we're very active on the public policy side and the housing advocacy side. We're very active with the Oregon Housing Alliance and dealing with statewide issues. And then we also have taken a leadership role in 2 different areas. One is the preservation of existing affordable housing, and the other is manufactured housing and manufactured home parks specifically. For preservation, about 10 years ago, we launched a public-private initiative to preserve as much of the federally subsidized affordable housing in the state. There were some big HUD programs reaching maturity. So we pulled together city, state, and stakeholder groups to help us come up with a plan, which we have implemented. And we continue to meet about 3 times a year to talk about best practices, what's going on, and then to advocate for resources. We have not, we're a convener in this role. We have not financed all of these, but this program has preserved 277 projects around the state, about 10,000 units. It's helped generate $182 million of legislative allocations of resources to subsidize that work. And I think there's $1.5 billion worth of construction contracts coming out of that. So this is good for local communities from a job standpoint. And then we've also assured $1.3 billion of federal rent subsidies that will continue now for the next 20 years to come into the state. So that's a pretty big impact from a really big group of stakeholders out there. But we convene a leadership group around that, like I said, to keep that project moving forward. I think what's really telling about that program from my standpoint is that the average income level around the state of the people who live in this housing is less than $10,000 per year. So you can imagine if we lost these projects, how much worse off we'd be today than we already are. So we feel really good about that success. And in manufactured housing, more recently, probably about 3 years ago, we looked at this model that we had been using for preservation with the public-private partnerships and work groups coming together to tackle issues, and we thought it'd be great to start bringing the same type of collaboration around a table. So we started convening organizations that were active or had an interest in manufactured housing and manufactured home parks to bring more attention to that really important and unsubsidized source of affordable housing around the state. And we've made some really good progress. You know, there's some unique public policy issues, I think, related to manufactured housing, and you have some of the experts in the state right here, so you're pretty fortunate from that standpoint. But you know, the homeowners face the risk of potential park closures and the loss of their homes from that, and they also are at risk of being priced out of their homes through rent increases. So we're really working to try and mitigate those risks for the sector of homeowners that are out there. We also are turning attention to the condition of those homes and are helping coordinate, we don't do this work directly, and create resources for the replacement of older dilapidated manufactured homes that are really a threat to health of the families that live in them. They're a threat to the climate, and they're really energy inefficient, yet they're really difficult to get replaced. So we have had some of these convenings be around how is it that we collectively go about doing this work. We worked very closely with Representative Marsh in this last session. I'm guessing you've heard about House Bill 2896. That bill, we launched really three with her, 3 of the 5 bills that were rolled into 2896 and what became known as the Omnibus Manufactured Housing Bill. But what's important about that, just to recap, is it provides resources for park acquisitions by mission-oriented owner groups, whether they're co-ops or nonprofits or housing authorities. It provided resources for home replacements in the form of subordinate soft loans and grants for decommissioning, because a lot of these have toxic materials and they're very expensive to dispose of. It allocated resources to the city of Springfield to work on their new park development. And then it requires the formation of a advisory committee to advise the department and the state policymakers around manufactured housing. So we're really pleased with the success of that bill coming out of the legislature, and we'll be heavily involved, at least watching and offering our opinions and advice on things during the implementation process. You know, I think with that, that gives you a good background of a couple of the areas that we're really focused on and who we are and what we do. This is a really important community for us, and the work that happens. You have not only great developers, you have great staff, you have local resources, you have all of the pieces that most communities don't have, and really makes it, as hard as it is, it makes it easier, if you can imagine. I mean, I tell the practitioners that and they'll laugh, but it is true. A lot of communities don't have any of that kind of support mechanism, and they just haven't gotten anything done as a consequence. So with that, I'll close.
Thanks. Do you all have any questions?
Phil, could you talk a little bit about a couple of the parks that you guys have helped fund in Lane County?
Yep.
Thinking specifically about Oak Ridge and Saginaw.
Yeah, Oak Ridge and Saginaw for sure, and we financed another one, Vitally in Leesburg, and Shoreview, Cottage Grove is another one.
Those are co-ops.
Those are both co-ops, yes. And then, so Oak Ridge, and
they're co-ops now.
They're co-ops now. They weren't before, but they now have resident ownership, which is terrific. And then Oak Ridge and Saginaw were both parks that St. Vincent de Paul has taken on and really transformed. And they were very, very challenging communities, both the small community of the park itself and then their impact on the community where they're located. Done really remarkable work in turning those communities around, replacing a lot of the old homes, and getting them stable and to be good communities for families to live in. And so we financed acquisition loans for both of those so that St. Vincent de Paul could get control of the park. And then we followed on when their renovation work was done and provide permanent loans on those parks as well. You know, those are the kinds of projects where you see this transformation, and it just makes your day to be involved in this industry out there. So, yeah. Is there anything else in particular you want me to mention, Stephanie, on that? Is that good?
No,
Okay.
I guess maybe the one other question is when you buy a new manufactured home to put in one of these parks, how much does it cost?
Boy, it can range from $50,000 to $200,000. It just depends on the size and the finishes, but they generally are more cost-effective than site-built, unless you're buying the top-end models, in which case it's much more of an equal play.
And we should note that the folks in Roseburg and Curry County experimented with rehabbing existing older pre-1976 manufactured homes and found that it's just cost-effective. You just got to recycle and get it.
I thought when Terry was here, was that last month, talking about this, that he said they were able to find used homes to move into Saginaw, not just new. And I'm not talking about pre-76, but you know, more current stuff to move in there.
They have a few used homes that I think were from the 90s that they moved in and rehabbed.
I don't think there's a lot of them. There's
No.
a sort of turning into magic.
Trading used books.
If they're out there, don't find them.
Hey, they're successful.
Yeah.
So NOAA is sort of like a conventional bank. Full disclosure, I used to be one of those people. So, I mean, when you all were started, it was probably all these banks who had the CRE duty, Community Reinvestment Act, CRA duty, and so they poured money into it. But since then, that's sort of changed, as I understand it, because they weren't throwing away money just to satisfy the law. You all managed to run a successful bank. And so now they're just depositors or investors or whatever in you all, is that correct?
Yeah, so we're, to be clear, we're a borrower, and they expect it all back. And it's interesting, when you look at our formation, CRA played a major role for sure, but the other thing was that this kind of lending back then with tax credit projects was pretty new. And the banks were really quite scared. And they thought that these were all going to be bad loans, and because you were relying on poor people to pay them back. And so they figured that the best way to mitigate their risk was to form a consortium that would share the risk. They'd all have a little bit of money in a whole bunch of deals, and then the ones that went bad, they'd only lose a little bit of. And that's all changed because this industry has proven through good times and bad to be the most resilient in real estate and one of the lowest default rates of any of the sectors. And so now the banks are looking at this as really legitimate business. And you know, there's pieces of it they want a lot, like the construction loans and the equity investments. And then they'll often take the permanent loans if they need to. And so it has totally shifted from a risk mitigation investment in NOAA to really being more of a profit center for them and a way for them to be able to keep making construction loans without having to take the permanent loan.
So do you do like a lot of banks do, which is when you make these long-term loans, then syndicate them and try to sell them off to insurance companies and the like, and so leverage yourself up?
Yes and no. We do absolutely sell off our loans, but we do it just periodically and on a loan-by-loan basis. In fact, we just closed on a sale. I'm not sure if anybody in this room had one that we went through, but we will sell them first to our member banks. We feel they have that opportunity, and they've had a strong interest in them. And so,
There's no season the loans.
yes,
Yeah.
we keep them. We only sell the good ones.
Right.
Of course, they're all good, but we only sell the really good ones, and so the banks like that.
Another issue with this is that a lot of NOAA's loans have the Oregon Affordable Housing Tax Credit attached, which limits the buyer. And
So, yeah, we've been, it's, knock on wood, but when I talk about how the industry has performed, we've been doing this since 1990, we've not had a default. And so we feel pretty good about that. And that speaks a lot to the partners in the industry and doing a good job developing and operating. But it also, I think, speaks to the fact that these are good transactions, and people need to live somewhere.
You're doing better than your member banks.
In a lot of, yes, in a lot of cases, yes.
But that risk-taking now is going on with the manufactured home parks.
Yep.
So those are not loans that any normal sane bank would make. And so you need a NOAA to lead on that.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely, and that's where having some of these other resources now, foundation money, some of our own capital, lets us get into places where we couldn't use bank capital for because it is not risk tolerant, and so being able to do that. But the fact that we can do it with manufactured home parks, we do have our banks agreeing to fund those, and I think they're going to learn about manufactured home parks like they did around the rest of affordable housing, that those are good transactions. And I think they perform every bit as well, but probably better than an apartment loan does for us.
So, two other things. First, I just wanted to thank NOAA for their advocacy on preservation, which resulted in resources that directly impacted this community. Those resources are part of the funding package for the preservation of Yopoa Terrace, which is 50 years old. And we have a lot of other housing developments that are getting up in age and that are going to need to access those kinds of resources to be able to sustain operations, upgrade, and those kinds of improvements, not only keep the projects affordable, they help address energy efficiency, they address seismic issues, and so they're meeting multiple goals for the community as we're preserving those projects, so thank you.
Yeah.
The second thing is that we are launching a local affordable housing trust fund. We're going to be talking a lot about how to use those additional dollars. As it relates to housing development, do you have any suggestions for what you think those dollars? And if we're not talking Portland bond dollars, we're sort of talking a couple $1 million. So what kinds of things do you think are most needed to help support projects?
Well, I guess it depends on what kind of money it is and how you think it's going to go out the door. If
broadly at this point.
Okay.
Yeah.
I think you should ask him to think about this.
Yeah, I think that is a good question, a good point, John. There really are a number of ways that we see other jurisdictions who have a little resource making targeted investments to have impact, and it can run the gamut.
So along those lines, you said Eugene does a great job, but we could always do better. Are there things that you've learned from other communities around the state or elsewhere that we could benefit from? We don't get the people from the big city of Portland coming down here very often to share what the rest of the world does.
He grew up in Corvallis, so don't go overboard here.
Well, I think there was a reference earlier to the housing bond. Really, you have all the technical capacity, right? Both public sector, private sector, you have all the technical capacity. The issue is money, and the housing bond will make a big difference in the Portland area. I don't know what the likelihood of anything even being proposed or passing in this county would be, or in the city, but that's going to make a big impact. And especially with the constitutional amendment that passed at the last election, you now can leverage that money up and get a big boom out of whatever you put into it. And I think that's very important. You should take advantage of the opportunity.
Okay, I'll think about it.
So I wanted to just add 2 points to Bill's presentation. One is that I think NOAA has made a loan to a project for every one of our housing partners in Lake County. So that's significant. Secondly, Bill is incredibly important to our advocacy in the legislature to have a banker come and talk and use terms like risk tolerant, which is not part of my normal vocabulary, but to have him there and be able to explain how the money works, how important the money is. The legislature doesn't just give us money for affordable housing. It also gives us the Oregon Affordable Housing Tax Credit, property tax exemptions, and other things. And it's key to our ability to keep getting those things, to have somebody like Bill to testify.
Yeah, I would really reinforce that. The point I was talking about before, Bill really reinforces that having the resources available in whatever form or configuration is really critical. And there's a lot that's being done around rehabilitation of manufactured housing projects, but there's other kinds of housing that you want to be able to see these kinds of resources be able to be used in, smaller homes, micro housing, whatever. This is a resource that could be really helpful for that. And the point I was making before, and where Bill's presentation is if you think of the 3 pillars that housing needs, what to build, where to build, how to build, the how to build is a critical piece, because if I don't have the resources and I don't have the mechanisms in place, then it doesn't really matter that much what I want to build and where I want to build it. I haven't got the money or the resources to do it. That's your neighborhood conversation. That's the where to build is the whole thing to leave aside. Sure. But I think the how to build is exactly what we're talking about today, and it's still a sticking point for us. And Bill's efforts really help a lot, but it's this much of a problem that is really this big.
So do you have experience in providing financing for non-traditional housing types?
Oh, we do finance, well, I think, yeah, you could say manufactured housing would fit that definition. And we actually have loans to St. Vincent de Paul. They bought homes to put onto their projects separately from the loan for the park itself. We do that in a couple of different ways. I think NOAA is a place where some of that type of activity can happen.
Yes.
And the more that we have some flexible capital to help us make that happen, the right kind of capital, it's all about lining up sources and resources with the need. But the more we have that kind of capital, the more we can try some things. And I think, we can be a great incubator and try some of these things, whether it is micro housing or tiny homes or modular housing. You're going to start seeing a lot more of this kind of stuff as people look for different ways to solve the problem. And it's all important. Some people just kind of wave off that little stuff, but it's all part of the solution. I don't think we are in a place to turn our back on any of these ideas, because they all play a niche role. And at the end of the day, it's as much as we need housing and money for housing. Our affordable housing crisis is also an income problem.
Oh yeah.
So someday we need to also focus on that side of the equation.
Wages.
Okay, thank you. Anybody else? Josh, what do you want?
It's just to him, and it's just along the lines of everything you were just talking about, and the answer's maybe at this point no, but maybe in the future, because everyone was really excited about the manufactured home parks that have now become cooperatives, which I think is really cool, and I'm just wondering if there's been any projects you've worked on, or if that's something you consider working on in other forms of housing, being cooperative housing. I know there's been there's little, and it's one of these alternative topics that's been really effective, that does do a lot for those income questions, and I don't want to go bullhorn, but there's this new discussion of land trusts. There was one just recently mentioned, and limited equity co-ops, and even some of our city councilors who are, anyway, it's a home ownership, and it's microloaning.
And so I asked him that question. Are you, open to non-traditional housing types?
Yeah, he said yes, but
we've got an East Blair. Okay.
Curious.
We've got an East Blair co-op. I mean, they're and Dev Northwest has done some of that. Sorry, stuff.
We'll all get there, don't worry. We're sure.
Changing habits is
Maybe. Some of us may be too old. Anything to add, Bill, to that?
No, we'd certainly be open to looking at that kind of thing. I
Great.
think there's a lot of questions to ask and answer, but yeah.
And and I would just add, as someone who is on the loan review committee, I get to see projects from all over the state. And it's really interesting to see the range. You see people trying modular, you see that there's, you know, different forms of ownership that are being considered. And so there's a lot of different models that are out there that can work. But it can be challenging to figure out how to pull all the pieces together. But, and I think NOAA is playing a big role in supporting those.
Let me just note one thing as sort of a teaching moment here, so this, because I can see this coming back. It's difficult to do limited equity co-ops in Oregon without a state statute that creates that co-op. Manufactured dwelling park nonprofit cooperatives. That's a technical term in a statute that I helped to write. And that statute, to qualify, if you qualify for that, you qualify for the Oregon Affordable Housing Tax Credit, property tax exemptions, a whole bunch of stuff. But you have to incorporate as that corporation only, and that statute provides that if you want to sell your property and your everything and dispose of it all, you don't get to take the money and run off to Florida. You have to give it to another C3. That is not true of any other cooperative. East Butler Housing Co-op had limited equity in its articles. You cannot prevent them from amending their articles. They're no longer a limited equity co-op. So before you run off thinking that's the best idea since sliced bread, it's got problems.
It's one model, and that's
You're the second person
thank you,
that's been promoting that to me.
Okay, anybody else, anything from Bill? Thank you. Thank you very much for coming. I think the Affordable Housing Trust Fund Committee might do well to hear from Bill, but you're pretty knowledgeable about this stuff too. Thank you.
We'll invite him back.
Okay.
Happy to come anytime.
Okay.
So, next on the agenda, Consolidated Plan. Over to you, Stephanie, I think.
Yes. So I mentioned this last time and said we'd have a little bit more information for you this month. So Eugene and Springfield every 5 years do the Consolidated Plan, which is essentially an effort to assess the needs within the community and establish a set of strategies and goals for using our federal HUD funds that the cities of Eugene and Springfield receive directly. So this is a process that we've done before, and the 2015 plan is available on the city's website and also on Springfield's website, along with our annual allocations, which are in the action plans, and then annual performance reports, which are in the CAPER, which we shared copies of today. And so in this process, as you look, we're starting to do the data analysis, needs assessment, and then we will be doing that in October and November. We will be doing public outreach and in November, December, and January. And with the expectation of coming up with a set of draft strategies in February. And then ultimately, the plan has to be adopted by April. And so we are working with an external consultant that has worked with communities across the country called the Cloudburst Group. And so they will actually be doing a lot of the data analysis for us and working with us to structure the public engagement. And we'll be weaving together elements of our past processes with best practices from other places for doing these types of processes. We do want to take advantage of as much research, other planning processes, other needs assessments and surveys that have already been done, so we're not asking people for the same information in a different way. So already, for example, Lane County is doing their needs assessment since they're a community action agency, so we would take that information and give it to the consultants as part of the data analysis. So that's sort of one thing that I wanted this group to be aware of, and if you know of any needs assessment or or analysis that you want to share that you think would be helpful, please send it to me and I will pass it along. Another example is the recent renter survey is an excellent resource that we will be passing along to help identify issues in our community. The other part for the public outreach, we have worked with HPB through the Lane County Human Services Commission, through other existing forums and bodies to try to reach out to the many groups that HUD wants us to reach out to as part of both the Consolidated Plan and the analysis of impediments process. So I will have more information next month, as we're just now working with the consultants to kind of outline what those would look like. One of the things we did try to do last time is to go to meetings that are already scheduled. And so if folks do want to send information about meetings to me, that would be great. And where we could take some portion of the meeting time to talk about the consolidated plan and hear the perspectives of people in the community. I think I'll stop there and see if there are any questions or comments or any ideas related to data or outreach that folks have. Okay.
Been good the last 2 times.
Yeah.
Oh, one question I have. The consultants, are they bilingual for Spanish-speaking clients and community members?
So they do have bilingual folks on staff. We are likely to work with a local community outreach consultant as part of the project. We haven't brought them on yet, but we would make sure that bilingual capacity is part of their skill set. Yeah.
Okay.
All right, well, thank you.
So next on the agenda is the Renters Protection Committee update. I'll start us off on this. We had our first meeting on September 11th, and a lot of us was getting to know each other. It's a pretty diverse group, very diverse, and that's great. But so there was some work on getting to know each other. We put together a work plan. I shared it with you all last month, and the charge, it's hard to say a charge from council, but what can we understand council to be interested in, maybe is a better way to put it, we tried to limit the scope somewhat. So there's some stuff, we're not gonna talk about mobile home parks, for example. There's a bunch of stuff we're not gonna address, but we're gonna address a few concrete areas where we feel we can make some progress. And so we approved the work plan, actually with some minor amendments. I'm trying to remember what those are. I didn't write those down. One was support for renters, non-financial. I mean, we can provide rent support, so that sort of thing. I mean, that's just money. But a lot of people were pointing out that a lot of people who are in housing, if they're likely to lose their housing, it's for, behavioral kinds of problems, mental health, all that kind of stuff. And maybe we should consider supporting support systems that are non-financial. So we sort of broadened one category to include that. And the other was, we have a statute now that, what did you call it? Limits rent increases?
Rent cap.
Caps rent increases, but we're gonna actually look at rent control as well. And that probably is a little bit beyond the scope that we had originally, but we thought there was a lot of support for that. So you have in your pack.
Could I
Sorry.
just mention one more thing that
Yep.
happened at the last meeting? We also had a presentation from Shile Reuter from Fair Housing Council of Oregon.
Right.
As part of, she happened to be in town for a training, and so we took advantage of her presence to talk about the work of Fair Housing Council of Oregon and our current fair housing programs and initiatives.
So our next meeting is day after tomorrow. The agenda is in your packet.
Actually, I'm gonna pass it out.
Oh, we're passing it
I'm
out.
getting it now.
Okay.
We did,
I think
this group, you know, has landlord interests, tenant interests, and some
Something else.
in between. And so some of these subjects are going to be difficult to deal with and to try to find consensus around. So we sort of we thought we'd start off with one of the easier ones, which is education. Everybody feels that both tenants and landlords, especially tenants, can benefit from knowing both their rights and their responsibilities. And there's some organizations around town who do some of this, and we're going to hear from a number of them on Wednesday, not so much what they do, but what their ideas are that we could develop to provide more education, especially for renters. I mean, the landlords do trainings for them, you know. We have landlord trade groups that do a bunch of that, but there'll be some of that as well. And I think I'm optimistic that we'll be able to come up with some proposals that probably will take money to provide education to all parties, landlords and tenants. So that's going to be our focus day after tomorrow. You can see the kinds of organizations we've asked to come talk to us and share their ideas. After that, we go into deposit support, I think. So the following meeting, we're going to talk about security deposits, first, last, and et cetera. And that one, I mean, we're not there yet, but one of the things we'll talk about is money. We can provide supports for, yeah, thanks, I'm not going to go through the whole thing. So we could provide, of course, money to help people with first class deposits to get into rentals. But I think we'll talk about some other stuff too, on what some other communities are doing. Portland, for example, and I understand Minneapolis now, you know, on putting limits on what landlords can charge for that kind of stuff. That will come harder, but you know, that will be part of the conversation. So I think we got off to a good start, and I'm looking forward to the meeting on Wednesday. That's what we're up to. And just as a reminder, we're going to try to get some final, we'll sort of, the proposals will come out because I think the Affordable Housing Trust Fund Committee would be interested in some of these ideas as we're going on, as they're trying to decide how to dole out the Affordable Housing Trust Fund money. But we want to wrap up by the end of the academic year, next spring, I guess, early summer. Do you want to add?
You know, I would just say, you know, with like any first committee, we're trying to have the group get to know each other a little bit, and so it was a great set of experiences around the table and a number of different perspectives. So I think there was a lot of learning even in the very first meeting. You know, as we're looking at each of these meetings, we're really trying to kind of create an opportunity for learning about existing programs, what elements of those programs could be expanded in some way, shape, or form, what are the key challenges we're trying to address, and some tentative set of recommendations. We are moving through a lot of topics fairly quickly, and so we're going to try to have some conclusions at the end of each meeting, but we will have kind of a package of things by the end of the academic year, as Norton said. And we are trying to tackle topics related to money earlier so that those recommendations could be shared with the Affordable Housing Trust Fund Advisory Committee. Yes. I've had a lot of practice. So.
Oops, questions?
There is also information on our website. There is an interested parties list that you can sign up for. Others can sign up for if you're interested. Of course, you can come and give comment. You can also email if there's something in particular that you think is important. Please, we do want folks to give us information as much as possible so that we can pull that together and develop recommendations.
Okay, thanks. I guess you've got the agenda wrong. It's the Affordable Housing Trust Fund Advisory Committee.
Sure. We ran out of space. So.
Next.
Yes. So I'm pleased to share that we're making good progress with forming the Affordable Housing Trust Fund Advisory Committee. There's a short memo in your packet, and then also there is a list of the applicants that I have, I'm sorry, a list of who was selected that I have here that I can share with folks. And there you go. So we did receive 37 applications for the Affordable Housing Trust Fund Advisory Committee, which I think really is reflective of the interest in the community. We did try to get the word out very broadly regarding this opportunity, and I would definitely say that it was a very, very strong group of applicants. We spent a lot of time looking at the list and thinking about how do we create a group that is representative of different parts of the community geographically, different interest groups, race, gender, ethnicity, and disability. And so the folks that were identified and ultimately selected by the city manager are as follows. For the private sector positions, we were looking for one business representative, one home builder, and one realtor. And so John Borofsky, some of you may know, he owns La Perla and Beppe and Gianni's, and he served on the Budget Committee, the Planning Commission, the CDBG Advisory Committee, and so he was selected for the business position. Dane Butler is a local home builder, and then Isaac Judd, who is a realtor and on Housing Policy Board. Thank you, Isaac, for applying. And then for Housing and Population Advocates, Paula Farquhar Stout. She has been involved with First Congregational's housing initiative, and so some of you know they're working with St. Vincent de Paul to put 2 houses on church property. And so she wrote a great application. Carmel Snyder is with AARP, and she is also a renter. Sarah Pictionary is a U of O student, and a single parent, also a renter. And then at-large positions, Pete Knox is a renter. He lives downtown. He's involved with the Downtown Neighbors Association and has been involved in some other city committees. And then Karen Knudsen is with Better Housing Together. And then Scott Rogers is someone who recently moved to our community and has previous experience in his old community with community development, block grant, and housing development, but he doesn't work in the housing development industry. So I think we've really tried to kind of get broad representation. These individuals represent 8 different neighborhoods. So we managed to get really broad geographic diversity. And those neighborhoods are south, north, and west fairly evenly. So that was important as well. Any questions about the advisory committee composition?
When do they start?
So right now we are working with the members to try to find a date.
Yeah.
And so they were notified late last week, and so we're trying to get the first meeting together for later in October, and so we think that's pretty likely at this point, but haven't quite identified the specific date. But we will send out an email to the HPB email list when we do. I will say, when you're first forming a committee, the first meeting is a lot of people kind of getting to know one another, helping people to understand how the city adopted the Affordable Housing Trust Fund, what the guidance is, and then a little bit about our existing needs in the community. And so, of course, these are all public meetings, folks are welcome to attend. And what we do expect is that the first couple of meetings will be focused on more of kind of the building the foundation. And then the next couple meetings will focus, we anticipate one will focus on renter issues, both development and assistance. And then another one will focus on homeownership, both development and assistance. We are aiming to try to get back to council early next year. It's likely to be February, and with kind of an initial set of recommendations. And we are still estimating how much money we think we'll have. So the money just started accumulating in July, because that's when the construction excise tax was put into effect. Any questions, comments?
Good start.
Yeah.
Okay. Anything else? Shall we adjourn early?
What were you thinking about the priority setting planning session, which we had scheduled in the summer and then postponed because we weren't ready? What are your thoughts about it now? Put you on the spot just like you put Chris on the spot.
Yeah, but he's used to dealing with this sort of stuff. I'm still struggling with trying to work with our elected representatives and getting some feel for what they want to do. I mean, I have a pretty good idea in his case, but, you know, I haven't made much headway there. Okay. I guess that's all the answer you're
That's
gonna
it.
get. Anything else? Well, I won't, I'm not gonna ask, because I would just get another question. Okay, so if it's okay, we will adjourn?
Yeah.
We are adjourned.
Cool.